Good afternoon. I've started to keep track of articles that I come across that might be of interest to the people who are watching these videos that I make or have something to say that might contribute to the content of the videos I make. And just the other day, in one of the lists that I get of articles dealing with education, was a headline that read, "Should classroom cameras be used after the pandemic?" The brief outline of what could be found if one clicked on the hyperlink referred to the fact that this individual, who was a research fellow at the Hoover Institute, was posing this question in a blog or an article. And it struck me because, and I think I've mentioned this before, I used a camera, or suggested that someone that I was working with used a camera in the classroom a long time ago for the very thing that this article referred to. And I'll relate the story first. So, when I was a consultant for technology in the classroom, I was required, my responsibility was to be a contact for teachers who were trying to learn how to use technology more productively in their classrooms, and to be an instructor to help new trends find their way into the schools. And I had a phone call from this guy, actually, it was an email, I think. No, a phone call from this teacher that I had already worked with before, who phoned and said, "Howard, I have a question. I have a student who is at home recovering from surgery, and she is feeling very isolated and alone because she can't see her friends. Aside from the fact that she realizes, and her parents realize, she was missing schoolwork." So he said, "I was wondering, how do you feel about my having a camera in my classroom to help her connect?" Now, in those days, cameras were not embedded in a laptop, they were external. You plugged them into a port and they could be moved to suit the needs of whatever it was you were doing. My response was an immediate absolutely. Even, I hate to say it, 20 years ago, I saw the value in having a camera available for a teacher to help a student who was a shut in participate in the class. It's all about the forming of a community, the communication that was possible. The students who were sitting in front of the teacher, seeing their friend and being able to interact, and the student who was at home being able to see her friends and being able to interact with them. The article that I'm referring to went on to talk about students not just who are sick, but students who might be involved in other things and not able to be physically present in the classroom. We've come a long way since those days, but the idea of using a camera, and whether one should wonder whether or not it should be continued after the pandemic, is a it seems to me is a non-starter of a question. I just participated in an online learning experience today, listening to somebody talk about interpreting the end of the book of Genesis and the story of Joseph. And when the rabbi who was delivering his lesson was talking, he was up large in my screen, and I felt immediately proximate to him. I couldn't necessarily interact with him one on one, and he could not see the eyes all at once of the people who were looking at him, but the camera and the use of Zoom made everybody feel like they were participating in a single event. As I'm relating this, I remember in the movie The Jazz Singer that told the story of Al Jolson and his arc as an artist, and that it was made into two parts because his life was so full of events. And it began with his participation in the Jazz Singer. But I remember one part, I think it was when he was in a review with Ruby Keeler, who he was married to for a period of time. And he was entertaining an audience, singing, and he instructed that the lights be turned on in the hall where he was performing because he wanted to see the audience and they wanted to see him. The camera does exactly the same thing. And the camera enables us to expand the reach of the classroom in so many ways. It seems foolish to think about what will happen after the pandemic and what technology we will not need to use. It's funny, but every piece of technology that we have acquired since we began with the Commodore 64 and the early years of the computer, we have found uses for that technology that have gone far beyond the original creation. There were a lot of articles and books in the early years of the computer that talked about the unintended consequences of technology, ways in which we haven't even begun to think how the technology will impact what we do. Those books that I read in the early days referred to the change that the printing press made. Who would have thought that the invention of the printing press would mean that books would become popular and Marco Polo would then write his journals and publish them about his experiences in exploring the what was then called the Orient and China, and then from that people bought that book, read that book, and that led to the development of trade along the Silk Road and led to the development of Venice as the hub of trade in the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, actually, the beginning of the Renaissance. Who would have thought that the printing press would somersault to other things? It's the same thing with the camera and camera technology. We can now extend the reach of what we do in the classroom because of the camera. I could be a classroom teacher, and if I'm helping my class learn something and I am in CAM because I have a couple of students traveling with sports teams or sick at home and recuperating, or shut in because of snowstorms, that same feed can help another class where maybe a teacher didn't show up because that teacher was sick and the class didn't have somebody to help teach them. If I'm an expert in something, I can teach more than one class, either live or by it being taped and shared again in another classroom. It boggles the mind to think about how the use of one piece of technology and the experience in the pandemic of what the webcam has enabled us to accomplish, to then turn around and think, well, we can go back. There's no going back. The use of the webcam for Zoom to teach invariably will mean we cannot go back. We're going to have to learn how to adjust. As I read somewhere, the genie has been let out of the bottle, and now we have to learn not how to contain the genie and put it back, but how we can use it more productively. Along the way, we'll make some mistakes. There's no two ways about that. Along the way, there will be things that we won't want to happen. But if we use the technology wisely and we set about to do that, the unintended consequences of each and every step can be overcome with goodwill and common sense. Will the webcam and its use continue after the pandemic? Absolutely. And it will continue to extend the reach of education and the importance of the person behind the camera, like me. You might not like that, but someone else you might like. Imagine what could have been if we'd been using the camera more before now. Enough for today.